Hey, it's Patrick Lovell, truth bombing on, I think it's Wednesday, April 26th, 2023 at 10:30 a.m. my time. And I got a blue check on Twitter. So I am reintroducing myself to some, maybe trying to say hello to those that know who I am, and for others that might be circling around and try to elevate what it is that I'm presenting to you above the madness of noise to see if I can't somehow penetrate where your interest lies to be able to help you discover what it is that is the revelation of all time. And so again, as the last couple of days, what we've been in the midst of is this sort of never-ending streaming, sort of speculation of what the immediate ejection of Tucker Carlson from Fox News means to the kind of the grand symphony of both politics, as well as populist movements and the shape of things to come, so to speak. And it was interesting as I was kind of running through this morning's sort of narratives. And typically, what I do is I start with mainstream with the New York Times, then I listen to those in the mainstream, that I missed out on the previous 24 hours, like MSNBC and CNN and Fox, for example. And then I visit, all of those online and just try to get a brief check, stick my finger in the air to understand which way the winds are blowing, and then to kind of extrapolate and then interpret what all of those things are in context to what it is that I'm continuing to do and what my effort is, which for those of you who are just seeing me for the first time, I'm an independent muckraking journalist and a producer that's got the answers that no one else will tell you. I'll just start with that. I've found and understood and revealed ultimately how Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was used illegally to basically spend tens of trillions of dollars on a bankrupted criminal enterprise that we call our financial system that blew up the world in 2008. And as a result of that, and as a result of no one understanding what that means in context to what happened, that it's created the world that we actually live in, and it leads to the sort of, it's a sinking ship and everybody's running in different directions, and we already hit the iceberg a long time ago, and we're already a failed state is what I argue. And if you follow me and if you understand where I'm coming from, you'll understand that I understand I think I put one too many understands in there, but how, what the media is, how it's supposed to function, what the law is, how it's supposed to function, what finance is and how it's supposed to function, and how all of them actually work to have sandbagged all of us in a situation where we've led our country to destroy our democracy, which is a rotting, festering infestation of corruption. That's led to what our reality is, which we are a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to pay the mafiocracy that has now fueled fascism. That's the reality. That's what we are. That's how it works. Okay, so let's hit the rewind real quick and create some sort of context, right? So, for example, right before I hit play on this, I was listening to Russell Brand, and I remember going, like years ago, like over a decade ago, particularly around the 2011-ish time period when Occupy Wall Street was kicking off, and I remember Russell Brand sitting in like t-shirts, basically talking to his phone, in a I think in his bed, as I recall. And he was always a marvel to me at how magnificent his verbal skills were and the way his mind worked in symphony to the right spiritual questions that people were asking. And he himself, of course, was on the pathway to discovery. But where a guy like Russell Brand and I differ, as well as many in our sort of space, I mean, I'm definitely a part of the same generation as Russell and Joe Rogan. And of course, I remember Joe Rogan's early days when he was first hitting YouTube, which was great because I knew who Joe Rogan was long before that. And I actually tuned in early, and I liked a lot of the pot smoking, let's drink some bourbon and try to ask some really fabulous questions about the world, until he gained millions upon millions of viewers and he became a force to be reckoned with that kind of put his toe in the space of where now Russell is. And then, of course, one of my favorite muckraking journalists of all time was Matt Taibbi, but then Matt Taibbi became something else. So those guys are all peers in terms of my age group, and yet you don't know who I am because I'm not at their level of, shall we say, piercing the veil of how technology has adapted and evolved over the course of the last 10 years, particularly during the Trump administration, because I guess the Federal Trade Commission changes and how that worked with the algorithms and that sort of thing. But, I produced this documentary series that reveals the question they're all asking for, but they can't identify. And this goes also in addition to Jimmy Dore, and I dare say, I don't even want to mention the other names, but the long and the short of it is they're all interested in the power behind the system. They're all interested in corruption. In fact, Russell Brand goes so far as to say he's on a path to create the Great Awakening. And what I've said and what I've interpreted and what my whole thing is, I'm creating a populist tidal wave crusade to purge corruption. Because if you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, that believes in, sustainability and dignity, integrity, and decency and liberty, combine and unify, that we can defeat tyranny, and then that'll be our destiny to usher in what I'm calling a Green New Deal. I've been on this pathway for 13 years to unpack and deconstruct what is. Because nothing made sense, because as all of the aforementioned have been questioning for some time, that mainstream media is just an extension of the machine. And the machine is literally the Borg. And the Borg is a corrupt apparatus that was that way for probably the last 40 years, based on what we call neoliberalism. But it didn't become this unbelievably immersed, entrenched, ensconced power apparatus that works in this way. Fundamentally, it just provides free money to the ultra rich and then buys their assets and sells on a global market. And they have basically thrown everybody off the fucking ship. And everybody's scrambling to try to find out how this whole thing works, but they don't understand because they've never stopped talking the whole time, and they all react to what I call the fool circus, which takes me full circle to the ultimate fool, I think, even though he does ask a lot of good questions on occasion, but it doesn't make up for all of the wrong that Tucker Carlson has been doing for now the last 5 years at least, in terms of fueling MAGA. In addition to all of the other things, all of the far left guys will give him, props for, because, he's anti-war because he's pro-Putin, or he's, willing to question the pharmaceutical industrial complex and its ownership of, certain media. But at the same time, he's fueling race baiting and hatred and speculation and misogyny and all sorts of other things that are problematic, if not in some ways completely illegal, especially if you consider the reality of what I've been trying to tell you, that all media has been a lie. And that's what all of these other guys are telling you, including Tucker, who's coming out of it, right? And the idea is, of course, the insurrection and the propaganda at Fox is demonstrated by the $787 million settlement with Dominion voting booths, and more to come, is that their whole system was a propagandized lie. But the big question is, why isn't the New York Times providing the discovery? Why didn't the New York Times, as the nation's paper of record with incredible resources to do investigative journalism, not answering really incredibly important questions? Well, because they don't want to become antithetical to the corporate machine, of which they covered up in 2008. And so it came down to somebody like me who understands how the law, how finance, and how democracy, and then ultimately the media are supposed to behave, and how they don't, and why they don't. Which brings me to this is all the emperor's new clothes. And I have the answers, going back to my very first point. Federal Reserve Act 13.3 was utilized behind the scenes after the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis that blew up the world, based on a massive criminal syndicate, which is all on display in my work at www.thecon.tv. You can also go and check out my podcast with our friends from The Real Progressives called The New Untouchables. And I also have many, 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 many hundreds, if not thousands of hours worth of information on Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs, The Con, on TikTok, and Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con on YouTube. And now that I have my my blue check, maybe the algorithms will help me, get to other people that I haven't been able to get to. Because I know that when I look at based on my experience, I feel like I'm spinning in place and I'm not going anywhere. They're not growing the circle and penetrating people's minds to make them understand that we have to unify and come together with the truth. And this isn't some hype. This isn't some sort of mythological, religious sort of, triumphant truth, in the vein of some sort of, historical context of religiosity and that sort of thing. It's just based on the facts that I've aggregated, which are monumentally bigger than Watergate or Contragate or so many other gates along the line, because this is the motherlode of them all. The world changed. The real coup d'etat didn't happen on January 6th of 2001. It happened in 2009 as a result of what I'm telling you. And then the then Obama administration circled the wagons, and they basically got the media on board, I would imagine, even though I don't have evidence of that, just based on what it looks like this many years later. And I worked with people from the New York Times and the Atlantic and ProPublica, some of the most important journalists in the world, as well as the ICIJ I've worked with. And we got that information, plus the information that I got from the C-suite executives who had this information. I got stuff from inside the courts all over the country. I got information from the top level people at the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, and also AGs around the country. And I got the entire story. And I've got even more. And the whole point is that this machine has circled the wagons to protect the guilty. We are not a democracy. The law is not supreme. We live in a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses socialism to fuel the mafiocracy that's now funneling money to fascism. And it's all a great play of wizardry and deceptive acts and practices and illegal reps and warranties that ultimately means betrayal. Because the law let them get away with it, because this is how we pay the law. You think I'm actually talking in platitudes like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders? No, of course not. Or even for that matter, most importantly, AOC at this stage of the game? No, they're not going to tell you these details. I don't think AOC has a clue of what these details are, to be quite frank with you. And then ultimately, what do we wind up with? We wind up with revelations that we've seen over the course of the last 4 weeks. Think about it. We've had massive bank runs where the Biden administration said, well, we had to bail these guys. We're not going to bail these guys out. We've got ways to be able to stabilize the market, but they bailed them out, okay, first and foremost. And that's part and parcel to the revelation I'm trying to tell you. But then we have, of course, all things Trump. And here's the thing I'll ask both MAGAs and anybody affiliated with, let's call it, what is it, the blue wave or something like that, which might be, as far as the MAGAs are concerned, deep state. If you can prove all of these different charges against Donald Trump that we're seeing on display throughout the entire legal system, between the DOJ in New York and, of course, the DA in New York and DA in Georgia, and then, of course, special prosecutor at the DOJ and the January 6th Commission, and all of these revelations that are coming out on Trump, in which he is completely guilty. And he should have been in jail long before we're dealing with this stuff now. That's how ridiculous our judicial system is when it comes to people who can defend themselves, especially if they have millions of people backing them up. What part of that spells justice? In the supremacy of law? Nothing, okay? But it's definitely circling the wagons on Trump. But I will tell you all that if Trump is guilty of everything they say he is, that I've read the indictments and everything that I know is coming down the pike, can then Wall Street not be in the same predicament? Well, if we had a fair and just system, they would be. But don't you think it's easier to lambaste one guy who is a blowhard freaking moron who's been guilty of mob tactics for his entire career that should have been taken out decades ago, but instead he wasn't? And now we're left with this situation where it's like justice comes in the form of taking Trump down. Meanwhile, it looks like it's going to be a presidential campaign between Trump and Biden. Are you kidding me? Not to mention the lesser thans, but the bottom line is none of them are going to purge corruption. That's the whole point. The system is completely corrupt. I'll remind you, Federal Reserve Act 13.3 pumped $30 trillion in 2009 to the system. And yeah, the system paid that money back. But then it also had another, sure thing where the government was buying all of its toxic assets through quantitative easing for trillions of dollars. And who couldn't make money if they gave you free money? And you could make money by just increasing the interest rate by 1%. I mean, it's a fixed rigged game, and it's as simple as it gets. And the problem is the law was in on it. The government was in on it. The Supreme Court was in on it. The judiciary around the country has buried tens of millions of people using illegal documentation fraud that in foreclosure cases that the foreclosing parties didn't have standing, because that's how messed up this was. I've got hundreds of thousands of pieces of documentation fraud evidence from places like the Registry of Deeds in Massachusetts and also in North Carolina. And I've got more information that you can possibly imagine. And why am I talking to you through my blue check? As you know, again, I'm a journalist and a producer and a guy who's got the truth that nobody is going to bring to you. Most notably, unfortunately, the likes of Tucker Carlson or the likes of Russell Brand or even the likes of Joe Rogan. I can't tell you why they don't. They just, if I had 50 million viewers, oh, you bet your ass they'd be all over this, right? It's a numbers game. It's an algorithm game. And they've all been, playing this full circles forever. And as much as I might like some of the time and, have problems with them at other times, and nobody's ever perfect, the problem is the entire system is a fucking train wreck. If we had this sort of, I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for, was just the opposite of professionalism. It's just, when the whole thing melts down, I mean, how would our planes fly? How would our stoplights work in cities? How would the elevators work? How would ships float? All of those things that require, integrity. How would they function if they were all corrupted? But meanwhile, we see it all the time. The financial system is completely corrupt. It's a parasite that has hijacked everything, and they've done so illegally. How do I know? I've done the work. I've got tens of thousands of hours into this, and I've worked with the top people in the country. And this is the story that everybody from Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders to the powers that be in the deep state to the far-right Republicans and everyone in between, if they know this story, they're not telling you. Because they're in on it and they benefit from it. The whole system is meant to make sure you don't know what it is that I'm revealing to you. And I have got to penetrate to the millions upon millions of people to try to redeem our country. I'm trying to create an exodus out of this incredible, and sorry to use the hyperbole of religiosity, but it's a good way to try to connect with people. And also there's a lot of useful storylines from the parables of history, right? It seems to me that the more things change, the more they stay the same. I am leading a charge of exodus to create a resurrection of the American dream and redemption for millions of people who want a society of, for, and by the people that uses integrity of law and the separation of powers, the genius of the way it was designed, to actually work in order to form a more perfect union. But we've been betrayed over and over and over. And the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist, because they thought you were some kind of new fool, because they piss on your head telling you it's rain. I woke up, I got the answers that the whole world is looking for. But the only way we're going to elevate this truth over the madness of lies if millions of us come together. So the ultimate ask is, I'm asking you to invest $13 in a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. And I'm asking you to get 13 other people to get involved as well. And we're going to grow the circle. My initial objective, let's see, it's the 26th now, I was trying to get to 1,300 investors. We've gotten 56. So that leaves only 1,254 between now and, let's say, the 30th, which I think is Monday, to try to get everybody involved to be able to bring this to the fore. And if you get involved, that's kind of like getting on first base. That allows us to get organized, to create the right podcast, to bring all of these truths, to elevate, to hire the experts, to beat the algo circus. And then ultimately, as we move forward and we create this tidal wave crusade to purge corruption, because nobody else is going to fight corruption. Biden has benefited from it, and he's a safe play for the system that works. I'm talking about the pharmaceuticals, the opioid guys, the fossil fuel apparatus, and the financial apparatus, and the entire system blew us up. I said today earlier on Twitter, I'm like, look, we all understand that if you are somebody who makes your money from drug dealing, and you've got a side enterprise of prostitution and racketeering and gun running and all of those types of things, we understand that's criminal. But literally, on its face, most of that is exactly what our financial system has been engaged with, whether it's the likes of, let's say, Epstein, and of course, the CEO of Chase, Jamie Dimon, and then on and on and on. I mean, the last 6 years has been insane in terms of the revelations, but things move so fast and your bandwidth is so polluted and short, and we're all inundated with a lot of information that's a lot more fun to look at and escape than deal with the reality of corruption. It's scary. And I had people earlier today say, look, this thing is just too hard to break through. No, it's not. You just have to become motivated. And I'm the Pied Piper. Why? Because somebody's got to do it. And I actually got the information. And who am I? Why don't I have skin in the game? And why don't I put my money in if you're just seeing me for the first time? I've got over 4 million in the game to get all of this information. But I got suppressed by BlackRock and the machine that doesn't want you to know this. I'm telling you, man, this is the emperor's new clothes on bad acid. All you got to do is pull back the curtain, and I'll show you exactly who Oz is and how we can fix it. I know exactly how to fix it. I know the right guys to go to. I know how to turn this stuff inside out, upside down. This is the biggest revelation of the last 70 years. I need millions of you to join me. My ultimate goal is to get 13 million people involved. Crusaders for Justice. And again, sorry to use the word crusade for people who think that's some sort of white supremacist sort of religious. No, it's not. It's grinding forward to penetrate the masses of this unbelievable betrayal and criminality that has complete control. And I'm a brawler, man. I always have been, and I've got to fight to win. And I need you guys to join me. I know that there's a lot of people out there, deaf, dumb, and blind, that are ignorant, that are pathetic, that can't fight for themselves, that won't fight for themselves. But boy, will they jump in when they see we've got momentum. I need fighters. I need warriors for justice. This isn't cliche. This isn't hyperbole. This is literally the world depends on us getting it right. We've already destroyed democracy. It's gone. We're not fighting for democracy. We got to get it back. And then if we get answers to the future of the problems that we have, my God, we've been lied to for at least the last 20 years to massive, massive calamity. Millions of deaths around the world that are unnecessary and just horrific. And my heart goes out to everybody who's had to endure this racket. Please, this is redemption. This is resurrection. Find us. Get in the game. And by the way, the last thing I'll say on this is if you don't have skin in the game, the way the billionaires operate and the multinationals is they spend billions to corrupt the system so that they can loot trillions and not pay taxes. That's the system in a nutshell. If you can't find $13 to rise for liberty and justice for all, to defeat corruption, to usher in the resurrection of the American dream, then I don't know what else to say. You're just fucking, I don't want to insult you, whatever. You go on your way. I need justice. I need people willing to fight for the future, willing to fight for what's right, and willing to fight to win and triumph and prevail over evil. If millions of us come together, we can bulldoze evil the way it has bulldozed us. Failure is not an option. Rise, roar, revolt, onwards and upwards. Thank you for listening.